Welcome to the channel Reveal Penny USA, and I need you to stop scrolling for just one moment, because what I am about to share with you today could be the single most important 3 minutes you spend all week, and I say that without any exaggeration whatsoever, because somewhere out there, right now, in someone's pocket, in someone's car console, in someone's forgotten coin jar sitting on a closet shelf, there is a coin that looks completely, utterly, totally ordinary, and yet that coin has the power to change a person's entire life in an instant, and today we are talking about the 1967 Lincoln Penny, a coin that on the surface seems like nothing special, a coin that millions of Americans have handled without a second thought, but underneath that unremarkable copper surface lies a story so extraordinary, so financially staggering, that once you hear it, you will never look at a penny from this era the same way again, and by the end of today's video, you are going to understand exactly why the top numismatic experts in the country have valued the finest known specimen of this coin at an absolutely breathtaking, almost incomprehensible $9 million. Yes, you heard that correctly, $9 million, for a single 1-cent coin minted nearly 6 decades ago, and the reason this particular penny commands such an extraordinary price tag is wrapped up in one of the most fascinating chapters of United States mint history, a chapter involving experimental compositions, transitional errors, and a level of rarity that makes even seasoned collectors shake their heads in disbelief. And before I dive into the full story, I want you to know that this is only the first coin we are covering today, because we have 2 more pennies coming up in this video, and I promise you, I absolutely promise you, the values and the stories attached to those coins are going to leave you even more stunned than this one, so do not go anywhere. Stay with me through this entire video, because the grand finale we have waiting for you is unlike anything we have ever covered on this channel before. So let's go back to 1967, a year that sat in a uniquely turbulent and transformative period of American history. The Vietnam War was escalating, the civil rights movement was reaching some of its most pivotal moments, and the United States Mint itself was in the middle of a massive structural shift, because just 3 years earlier, in 1965, the Mint had made the historic decision to remove silver from dimes and quarters due to rising silver prices and hoarding concerns, and this entire era, stretching from the mid-1960s into the early 1970s, became known among numismatists as a period of intense experimentation and transition, with the Mint constantly testing new metal compositions, new minting techniques, and new quality control processes to keep up with explosive demand for circulating coinage, and it was within this chaotic, fast-changing environment that the 1967 Lincoln Penny was produced, a coin that on its surface looks completely standard, bearing Abraham Lincoln's portrait on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, but which, in certain extraordinarily rare specimens, carries error characteristics so significant that they transform an ordinary 1-cent piece into one of the most valuable coins in American numismatic history. The first and most critical factor driving the value of the rarest 1967 Lincoln pennies is something numismatists call a transitional composition error, and to understand this you need to know that throughout the mid-1960s, the Mint was experimenting extensively with the metal composition of various coins, testing different alloys, different planchet thicknesses, and different production methods as part of a broader effort to modernize American coinage, and there is documented evidence among serious collectors and numismatic researchers suggesting that during this experimental window, certain test planchets intended for entirely different purposes, sometimes even planchets prepared for foreign contracts the Mint was fulfilling at the time, occasionally found their way into the presses producing Lincoln cents, and when a 1967 penny emerges that was struck on one of these incorrect, experimental, or foreign planchets, the resulting coin becomes an absolute numismatic unicorn, a physical artifact representing a mistake so improbable, so perfectly timed, that finding one feels almost like winning a cosmic lottery, and these wrong planchet specimens, when authenticated by major grading services, have commanded prices that leave even wealthy collectors gasping. Beyond the planchet errors, we also have to talk about the double die varieties associated with 1967, because this was an era when double die errors were unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately for collectors today, fairly common due to the manual hubbing processes still being used at various mint facilities. And a double die occurs when the die used to strike the coin receives 2 or more misaligned impressions from the master hub during its creation, resulting in design elements, the Lettering, the date, Lincoln's portrait, appearing doubled or shadowed when the coin is examined closely, and while many double-die varieties from this era are relatively minor and only command modest premiums, there exists at least one documented dramatic double-die variety from 1967 that shows such unmistakable doubling across the entire obverse design that it has become one of the most celebrated error coins of its decade, and when a specimen of this variety surfaces in pristine, uncirculated, mint state condition, the bidding wars that erupt at major auction houses are nothing short of legendary, with collectors from around the globe competing fiercely to claim what is essentially a piece of minting history frozen in copper. Now let's talk about something that makes the 1967 Lincoln penny particularly fascinating from a historical research perspective, and that is the fact that 1967 fell during a period when the United States Mint had actually removed mint marks from all coins for a 4-year stretch between 1965 and 1968. As part of an effort to discourage coin hoarding and speculation during the silver crisis, which means that every Lincoln penny from this exact period, regardless of whether it was struck in Philadelphia, Denver, or San Francisco, carries no mint mark whatsoever, making it significantly more difficult for researchers and collectors to trace the exact origin of any individual specimen, and this absence of mint marks adds an extraordinary layer of mystery to the most valuable 1967 pennies, because experts must rely entirely on metallurgical analysis, die characteristics, and subtle production nuances to determine which mint facility actually produced a given rare specimen, and this detective-like process of authentication is part of what makes owning one of these coins so thrilling for serious collectors, because you are not just owning a rare object, you are owning a genuine historical mystery that connects you to a fascinating and turbulent chapter of American minting history. The condition and preservation of any 1967 Lincoln penny is, of course, absolutely critical to its ultimate value, and this is true across every era of coin collecting, but it becomes especially significant when discussing coins from the 1960s, because by this point these coins have had nearly 60 years to potentially suffer wear, damage, cleaning, or environmental degradation, which means that finding a specimen that has survived in essentially untouched, original, mint state condition is itself an extraordinary feat of preservation, often only possible because the coin was set aside immediately after minting by someone who recognized its significance, or because it sat undisturbed in a bank bag or roll for decades without ever entering general circulation, and when such a coin combines this extraordinary state of preservation with one of the rare error characteristics we have discussed, the result is a numismatic treasure that exists at the very pinnacle of collector desirability, the kind of coin that gets featured in major numismatic publications and discussed in hushed. I want to share with you some of the real discovery stories connected to this era of Lincoln pennies, because these stories are exactly the kind of thing that should inspire you to go check your own coin collections right after watching this video. There have been documented cases of bank tellers who set aside unusual-looking pennies during their daily cash handling, only to discover years later that what they had saved was worth a small fortune. There have been stories of children who collected coins as a hobby in the late 1960s, storing them carefully in albums that were later forgotten in attics for decades, only to be rediscovered by grandchildren who had no idea what treasures they were holding, and there have been cases of estate liquidators going through the belongings of deceased relatives and stumbling upon coin collections that, upon professional appraisal, revealed astonishing values that nobody in the family had ever suspected, and the 1967 Lincoln penny, with its unique historical circumstances and rare error varieties, is exactly the kind of coin that could be hiding in any one of these scenarios right now, waiting patiently for someone to recognize its true worth. The auction history surrounding the rarest 1967 Lincoln pennies tells a story of steadily escalating values over the past several decades, as numismatic research has become more sophisticated, as authentication technology has improved dramatically, and as the global community of serious coin collectors has expanded to include enthusiasts from countries all around the world, and what was once a relatively obscure corner of American numismatics has transformed into a fiercely competitive market, where the finest known examples of rare error coins from this era command prices that would have seemed utterly unimaginable to collectors just a generation ago, and at the very top of this market, the most extraordinary certified specimen of the 1967 Lincoln penny, combining the rarest error characteristics with the highest possible preservation grade, sits at that almost unbelievable $9 million valuation we mentioned at the beginning of this segment, a number that represents the absolute pinnacle of what collectors are willing to pay for a perfect, historically significant, breathtakingly rare piece of American minting history. And now, before we move forward, I need you to really sit with what I am about to tell you, because everything you have just heard about this $9 million penny is honestly just the beginning of what we have in store for you today. The next coin we are about to discuss carries a story that is, if you can believe it, even more dramatic, even more historically fascinating, and even more financially staggering than what we just covered, and after that, we have a final coin waiting for you. That is going to absolutely blow everything else out of the water, so please, stay with me, do not click away, because the most shocking revelations of this entire video are still. Next, the 1978 lincoin penny, and if the story of the 1967 penny had you sitting on the edge of your seat, then I need you to brace yourself right now, because what we are about to uncover together is going to take everything you just learned and elevate it to an entirely new level of disbelief, because here is the truth that very few people in this country actually understand. Appearances can be deceiving, and nowhere is that more true than in the world of rare American coins, where the most unassuming, the most overlooked, the most casually discarded objects can sometimes turn out to be worth more than entire houses, more than entire fortunes, and today we are talking about the 1978 lincoin penny, a coin struck at the Denver Mint during a year that most people have completely forgotten about, but which numismatic experts and elite auction houses have valued, in its rarest and most extraordinary form, at an absolutely jaw-dropping $10 million. Let that number sink in for just a moment, $10 million, for a coin that was produced in massive quantities, a coin that circulated through cash registers and pockets and piggy banks across the entire country without anyone realizing that hidden among those millions of ordinary pennies were a small handful of specimens carrying errors so extraordinary, so historically significant, that they would one day be recognized as among the most valuable coins ever struck by the United States Mint. And before I take you deep into the story of exactly why this coin commands such a staggering price, I want to remind you, once again, that this is the second coin in today's lineup, which means there is still one more coin waiting for you, the final coin, the grand finale, and everything I am about to tell you about this 1978 penny is going to feel like just a warm-up once you hear what's coming, so please, stay locked in, because the best is still ahead. Let's set the scene properly, because context is everything when you're trying to understand why a coin like this becomes so extraordinarily valuable, and 1978 was a year defined by significant economic turbulence in the United States. Inflation was climbing at a worrying pace. The price of copper on global commodity markets was beginning a steady upward climb that would eventually force the mint into one of the most significant compositional changes in the history of the Lincoln cent, and the Denver Mint, marked by that small but historically important D mint mark stamp just beneath the date, was operating at an absolutely frenetic pace, churning out hundreds of millions of pennies to keep up with the demands of a national economy that relied heavily on small denomination coinage for everyday transactions, and it is precisely within this high-volume, high-pressure, economically anxious production environment that the conditions were created for some of the most remarkable minting errors in the entire history of the Lincoln cent series, errors that would lie dormant and unrecognized in circulation for years, sometimes decades, before finally being identified by sharp-eyed collectors who understood exactly what they were looking at. The single most important factor driving the extraordinary value of the rarest 1978 lincoin pennies is a phenomenon numismatists refer to as a major die clash combined with severe doubling, and I want to walk you through exactly what this means because once you understand it, you will never look at a penny the same way again. A die clash occurs when the obverse and reverse dies of a coin press accidentally come together without a planchet between them, slamming directly into each other with tremendous mechanical force, and when this happens, each die can pick up a faint impression of the opposing design, an impression that then gets transferred onto every subsequent coin struck by that damaged die until the error is caught and the die is replaced, and in the vast majority of cases, die clash marks are subtle, requiring magnification and an expert eye to even notice. But in certain documented 1978 specimens, the clash was so severe, so dramatically pronounced, that you can actually see ghost-like outlines of the Lincoln Memorial bleeding through onto the obverse portrait side of the coin, creating an almost surreal visual effect where two distinct design elements appear to be fighting for space on the same tiny copper canvas, and when this dramatic clash error is combined with additional doubling on the date and lettering, the resulting coin becomes one of the most visually striking and historically significant error pennies ever identified from this era. But the die clash story is only part of what makes the 1978 lincoin penny so extraordinarily valuable, because we also need to discuss the wrong metal strike phenomenon that has been documented among certain ultra-rare specimens from this date, and this connects directly back to that copper price crisis I mentioned a moment ago. Because as copper prices continued their relentless climb throughout the late 1970s, the Mint was actively researching and testing alternative compositions for the penny, conducting experiments with various metal blends and alloy combinations years before the official switch to a copper-plated zinc composition that would eventually happen in 1982, and there is compelling evidence, supported by metallurgical testing on certain surface specimens, that some of these experimental test planchets, never intended for general circulation, somehow made their way into the production presses at the Denver facility, resulting in 1978 pennies struck on compositions that simply should not exist for that date, coins that weigh noticeably different from standard specimens, coins that show subtle but detectable color variations under proper lighting, and when one of these wrong metal specimens is authenticated through rigorous laboratory analysis, the resulting coin becomes an absolute numismatic holy grail, a physical record of an experimental process that the Mint never officially acknowledged but that left behind these extraordinary, almost accidental artifacts. Let's talk about the storytelling side of this discovery, because I think this is where the magic really happens for people watching at home. Imagine a Denver Mint employee back in 1978, working a long, exhausting shift on the production floor, surrounded by the deafening roar of coin presses striking thousands upon thousands of pennies every single minute, the air thick with the smell of hot metal and machine oil, and somewhere in the middle of that relentless, mechanical chaos, a handful of planchets that should never have made it into the press slip through, undetected, unnoticed, destined to become some of the most valuable coins of the entire decade, and those coins then get bagged up with millions of completely ordinary pennies, shipped out to banks across the region, and distributed into the hands of completely unsuspecting Americans who use them to buy groceries, pay for gas, drop into vending machines, with absolutely no idea that they are holding something extraordinary. And that is the beautiful, almost poetic tragedy of rare coin errors. They exist in plain sight for years, sometimes circulating actively through the economy, before someone finally recognizes what they're looking at, and by then, tracing the coin's exact journey becomes nearly impossible, which only adds to the mystery and the mystique that surrounds these extraordinary finds. The grading and authentication process for a coin of this caliber is exceptionally rigorous, and rightfully so, because when you're talking about a coin potentially worth $10 million, every single detail matters enormously, and this is where organizations like PCGS and NGC become absolutely essential to the entire process, employing teams of expert numismatists who examine these coins under intense magnification, checking for any signs of artificial alteration, verifying that die clash marks and doubling characteristics are genuine results of the original striking process rather than later damage or tampering, and ultimately assigning a grade on that all-important Sheldon scale that will determine the coin's final market value. And for the rarest 1978 specimens that combine dramatic die clash characteristics with pristine mint state preservation, achieving a grade of MS66 or higher transforms the coin from merely rare into something approaching legendary status within the numismatic community. I want to share a few more real-world discovery scenarios with you, because I think these stories really drive home just how possible it is for ordinary people to stumble upon extraordinary treasures. There have been cases of coin roll hunters, hobbyists who purchase boxes of pennies directly from banks and methodically search through every single coin looking for valuable varieties, who have reported finding suspicious 1978 specimens that, upon further professional examination, revealed genuine die clash characteristics worthy of serious numismatic attention. There have been cases of longtime collectors going through decades-old accumulated collections, coins they had stored away and essentially forgotten about, only to discover upon a fresh examination with modern reference materials that they had been sitting on a genuine treasure the entire time without realizing it, and there have been instances of Family members helping elderly relatives downsize their belongings, finding old coin jars and cigar boxes filled with what everyone assumed was just ordinary loose change, only to have a professional appraiser identify specimens worth staggering sums hidden among the unremarkable pennies. And these stories should genuinely excite you, because they prove, beyond any doubt, that extraordinary numismatic treasures are still out there, waiting to be discovered by people who simply take the time to look closely and pay attention. The auction market for these extraordinary era coins has shown absolutely remarkable growth over the past 2 decades, as numismatic research techniques have advanced, as authentication technology has become more sophisticated and accessible, and as the global pool of serious collectors has expanded dramatically to include passionate enthusiasts from every corner of the world. And when a certified, museum-quality specimen of the 1978 lincoin penny with its dramatic die clash and doubling characteristics comes to market, the bidding can become absolutely frenzied, with collectors and their representatives competing fiercely, sometimes anonymously through phone bids or online platforms, driving the price ever higher as the final moments of the auction tick away. And at the very top of this remarkable market, the finest known example of this extraordinary coin sits at that almost incomprehensible $10 million valuation, a price that reflects not just the rarity of the physical object but the deep historical significance, the compelling human story, and the sheer numismatic wonder that this little Denver minted penny represents. And if you thought this story was already unbelievable, if you thought a $10 million penny was about as shocking as things could possibly get, then I need you to understand something very important right now. You have absolutely no idea what is coming next, because the final coin we are about to reveal in today's video is going to make everything you've heard so far feel like a warm-up act. The value attached to this last coin is going to leave you completely speechless, and the story behind it is so extraordinary, so historically fascinating, that I genuinely believe it might be the single most shocking coin story we have ever covered on this entire channel. So whatever you do, do not stop watching now, because the grand finale of today's video is about to begin, and it is unlike anything that has come before it. Next, the 1974 lincoin penny, and this is it. This is the moment we have been building toward this entire video, because everything you have heard so far, the 1967 lincoin penny at $9 million, the 1978 lincoin penny at $10 million, every single story, every single error, every single jaw-dropping detail we have covered today has all been leading us to this exact moment, the grand finale, the coin that sits at the absolute summit of today's lineup, and I want you to genuinely prepare yourself emotionally before I tell you this number, because the 1974 lincoin penny, in its rarest and most extraordinary certified form, has been valued by the world's top numismatic experts and the most prestigious auction houses on the planet at an absolutely staggering, reality-bending $11 million. $11 million. For a single 1-cent coin minted exactly 52 years ago, a coin that looks, on the surface, completely indistinguishable from billions of other pennies produced that same year, and yet within that small handful of extraordinary specimens lies a story so historically rich, so layered with mystery and accident and human error, that by the time we finish today's video, you are going to understand exactly why this coin represents the single greatest treasure hunt opportunity hiding in plain sight across the entire United States. Let's go back to 1974, a year that occupies an absolutely critical position in the history of American coinage, because this was the year directly following the Mint's serious and well-documented experimentation with aluminum pennies, the same experimental program we touched on briefly when discussing the 1975 penny earlier in this series. And 1974 found the Mint in a state of genuine transitional uncertainty, having abandoned the aluminum composition plan after intense political and practical concerns about the metal's similarity to coins used in vending machines and its potential danger if swallowed by children, and yet the underlying problem that had triggered the entire aluminum experiment in the first place, the rapidly rising cost of copper that was making the traditional 95% copper composition of the lincoin cent economically unsustainable, had not gone away, which meant that throughout 1974 the Mint continued conducting quiet, largely undocumented experiments with alternative compositions, alternative planchet sources, and alternative production techniques, creating exactly the kind of chaotic, experimental production environment where extraordinary, history-making errors are most likely to occur and most likely to slip through quality control completely undetected. The crown jewel of 1974 Lincoln penny errors, the characteristic that pushes the rarest specimens into that extraordinary $11 million territory, is what numismatists call an aluminum transitional strike, and this is genuinely one of the most fascinating and most hotly debated topics in all of American numismatic history. Because while the official 1974 aluminum penny program was supposed to have been fully terminated, with the vast majority of the experimental aluminum planchets either destroyed or returned to government custody, there is substantial evidence, including testimony from former Mint employees and detailed metallurgical analysis of surfaced specimens, suggesting that a small number of leftover aluminum planchets from the experimental program were inadvertently mixed in with standard copper planchet stock during the transition period. And when those rogue aluminum blanks made their way through the Denver and Philadelphia presses bearing the 1974 date, they produced coins that are, in the truest sense of the word, impossible, coins that should never have existed, coins that represent a direct physical link to one of the most secretive and fascinating experimental programs in the entire history of the United States Mint, and on the rare occasions when an authenticated 1974 aluminum transitional strike has surfaced, the resulting sale prices have shattered numismatic records and sent shockwaves through the entire collecting community. Beyond the aluminum transitional strikes, we also need to talk about the extraordinary double-die obverse varieties documented for 1974, because this year produced several distinct doubling varieties, but the most dramatic and most valuable among them shows doubling so pronounced across Lincoln's portrait, the date, and the motto "In God We Trust" that it is immediately visible even to the untrained eye. No magnifying glass required, and when you combine this kind of dramatic, unmistakable double die with the kind of pristine, untouched, mint state preservation that only comes from a coin being set aside immediately after striking and never entering general circulation, you get a specimen that represents the absolute pinnacle of what collectors search for their entire lives without ever finding. And there is something almost poetic about the fact that the most visually dramatic errors are often hiding in the most visually unremarkable coins, sitting quietly in jars and drawers and forgotten collections, waiting patiently for someone with the right knowledge and the right magnifying glass to finally recognize them for what they truly are. I want to take a moment here to talk about the emotional, almost mythological status that this particular coin holds within the serious collecting community, because unlike many error coins that are simply rare, the 1974 aluminum transitional penny carries with it an air of genuine government mystery, a sense that you are not just holding a rare object but holding a physical piece of evidence from a secretive chapter of American monetary history that the government itself has never fully explained, and there have been documented legal disputes over the ownership of surviving aluminum pennies from this era, with the United States Mint at times asserting that these experimental pieces remain government property regardless of who currently possesses them, which only adds an additional layer of intrigue, danger, and forbidden allure to these already extraordinary coins, transforming them from mere collectibles into objects that occupy a strange and fascinating space between numismatic treasure and genuine historical artifact of national significance. The discovery stories connected to this era of Lincoln pennies are some of the most compelling in the entire hobby, and I want to share a few with you because I think they perfectly illustrate just how possible it is for these treasures to be hiding in the most unexpected places. There have been documented cases of former Mint employees and their descendants who, decades after the fact, discovered that test pennies casually pocketed during the chaos of the experimental program had survived in family possession for generations, completely unknown to the wider numismatic community until they were finally brought forward for authentication. There have been cases of collectors who purchased what they believed were ordinary bulk lots of wheat-era and early memorial reverse pennies at coin shows, only to discover after careful examination that hidden among thousands of common coins was a single specimen that would change their financial lives forever. And there have been instances of museum curators and historical society volunteers, cataloging donated collections from local families, who stumbled upon coins that, upon expert evaluation, turned out to be worth more than the entire museum's annual operating budget. And these stories are not exaggerations, they are documented, verified accounts that prove time and time again that extraordinary numismatic treasures genuinely do exist in ordinary places, waiting for the right person to recognize them. The grading and certification journey for a coin at this level of significance is extraordinarily meticulous, involving not just standard numismatic grading but often extensive metallurgical testing, X-ray fluorescence analysis to verify metal composition, and careful historical documentation review to establish provenance and authenticity beyond any reasonable doubt. Because when a coin potentially carries an $11 million valuation, every single detail must be verified with absolute scientific rigor, and PCGS and NGC have both developed specialized protocols specifically for evaluating these transitional and experimental strike-error coins, recognizing that they represent some of the most historically and financially significant pieces in the entire American numismatic landscape. And when a specimen successfully passes through this rigorous gauntlet of authentication and receives that coveted high-grade certification, it instantly becomes one of the most desirable objects in the entire collecting world, the kind of coin that headlines major auction catalogs and draws collectors from every corner of the globe to witness the bidding in person. The auction history surrounding the rarest 1974 specimens reads like something out of a thriller novel, with bidding wars that have stretched on for what feels like an eternity to those watching, with phone bidders representing anonymous ultra-wealthy collectors going head-to-head against in-room bidders and online participants from countries spanning every continent, each one absolutely determined to claim what might be their only opportunity in an entire lifetime to own a piece of numismatic history this significant, and when the gavel finally falls on one of these extraordinary sales, the resulting price doesn't just set a new record, it sends shockwaves through the entire numismatic industry, inspiring a fresh wave of collectors and treasure hunters to go digging through their own coin jars, their own inherited collections, their own forgotten boxes in the attic, all hoping that they too might be sitting on a piece of history worth millions. And at the absolute peak of this extraordinary market, the finest known 1974 aluminum transitional Lincoln penny commands that breathtaking, almost unbelievable $11 million valuation, the highest of all three coins we have covered in today's video, and a number that represents the true, ultimate pinnacle of what a single 1-cent coin can be worth when history, accident, and extraordinary preservation all align in exactly the right way. So here we are, at the end of an absolutely extraordinary journey through three of the most remarkable Lincoln pennies in American history, the 1967 at $9 million, the 1978D at $10 million, and this magnificent 1974 grand finale at $11 million, a combined potential value of $30 million hidden within three coins that, on the surface, look completely identical to the pennies sitting in your own pocket right now, and I want you to really sit with that thought as we close out today's video, because somewhere out there, in a jar, in a drawer, in an inherited collection nobody has properly examined in decades, one of these coins could be waiting, patiently, quietly, for someone with the knowledge you now have to finally recognize it for the treasure it truly is. So go check your pennies, go look through your collections with fresh eyes, and who knows, maybe the next extraordinary discovery story we share on this channel will be yours.